All
You
right,
want to, yeah.
excellent. Yeah, good evening, everyone, or whatever time it is where you live. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. My name is Ryan Vance, and I am from the Belle Isle Nature Center located on Belle Isle Park in Detroit, Michigan. And I'm joined by my colleague, Brittany.
Hi, I am Brittany Like. I am the program coordinator for Detroit Audubon. We are also based in Detroit, and we offer various field trips throughout the Southeast Michigan area. So happy you could join us.
We're so happy you could be here. So, a little bit about this series. This is part two of a How to Start Birding webinar. It's a partnership between the Detroit Audubon and the Belle Isle Nature Center to make birding accessible to all the beginners out there, something that the past few years have really sparked in everyone's interests and imaginations is the nature that's been around us. As people have worked from home or spent a little bit more time in nature, we've been able to celebrate the beautiful nature that's all around us. And birding is a great stepping stone into the world around you. And so we're happy to host these webinars and give everyone just a few tips, a few ideas about birding, but also we're so excited to hear from you about what you know, what you're interested in. And so this will be very much a conversation, and we're looking forward to hosting for the next hour. This webinar will be going till 7 o'clock, and Brittany and I will be chatting about a few different slides we have, and we welcome your questions and comments. On the Zoom platform, you'll see a button that says chat, and we welcome you to enter in your questions into the chat. And towards the end of the Zoom, we will go through those and organize them and address all of those questions and have a nice, healthy conversation.
All right, we're going to go ahead and begin. So to start out, we're going to kind of just do a quick recap. So we offered this first webinar in June of 2022, so just a few months ago. And when we did that, we really wanted to talk about multiple things. Firstly, one of them was like the benefits of birding, what you should expect as a new birder, what you should wear, because a lot of times I feel like there's a lot of people that go out birding or go out into nature all the time, and we sometimes forget that there's people that maybe don't spend much time outside, and we almost look over the fact that they don't know what is recommended. It if you're going out in the middle of winter, you may think that, oh yeah, my winter coat's enough, but dress in layers, because if you're out there for 2, 3, 5 hours, it catches up to you. And so kind of reminders like that for people that maybe haven't spent much time outside, and just letting them know what we recommend whenever you're going out birding or even just going out in nature as a whole. Um, and so feel free to watch that first webinar. It's on the Detroit Audubon webpage. You can watch it at any time. It's about an hour long, but you're always welcome to go back and watch that again. So
Thanks, Brittany. And I'll drop a link to the Detroit Audubon's webpage in the chat so you can jump on there and explore all of the great resources that the Detroit Audubon has to share. I'll also drop in a link for the Belle Isle Nature Center's page where you can learn more about the Nature Center and some of the programming we do here at the Nature Center. Great. So some of the ways that we celebrate birding opportunities are by sharing with folks that birding is not this exclusive or far off thing that you need to be trained on or specialized in to do, because birds are all around us. Birding can happen from your window inside as you look out. It can happen in your backyard. And so there's so many places to observe birds, whether you're hearing them or seeing them. So we're really trying to normalize the idea that birding is all around us, right? And some of the ways that you can jump into deeper engagement with birding is by signing up for some of the organized birding field trips, right? So I'm going to drop into the chat real quick. First, I mentioned the Detroit Audubon's website. There it's coming in just a minute. And also places like the Belle Isle Nature Center, which I mentioned, hosting bird walks, so you get to enjoy the experience as a group, learn from each other, learn all sorts of fun ways that that you can be engaged with birds, learn maybe a few species tips or a few ways to identify types of birds by the sound, by the look, all sorts of different ways to do it. And you know, other things to do are take a walk in your neighborhood, see what's going on around you. Maybe your neighbors are also birders, and it's a great way to connect, chat with people, and find out what's happening around you. And then other ways are simply like you're doing now, joining a webinar, seeing all of these different resources that are online right now. So we look forward to sharing this and so many more opportunities for birding as we go on in the presentation. Next slide, please. But before we get started, we really want to hear from you in the chat. Please feel free to enter. Let's make this a conversation. What do you want to know about birding and equipment and ways to help you become a better birder? What are you interested in? Is it information about binoculars? Is it ways to use all the apps and different technology that help you identify birds? Maybe it's where to go birding, or maybe it's just general birding questions that you have. We can't wait to hear from you and help frame this conversation around your questions and where you're at. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
So quickly, a little overview as we start to hear from you and find out where you're at and what's going on. A little overview today is that we do want to talk about equipment, about all the things that can help you enhance your experience birding. First and foremost, with birding, observing, whether it's with your ears or your eyes, is the only equipment you need, right? Like that's a great way to jump into it. Um, sometimes sometimes having all this equipment or learning all these things all at once can be a lot, but knowing first and foremost to just go out, listen, think about the patterns you hear, like, oh, I hear this bird a lot, or the birds you see a lot near you. That's a great way to start. But other things that we want to talk about today are other ways to enhance that. So binoculars. Some people still have that pair of binoculars from like that they've been handed down, that's been in the family for a long time. And so that's a great pair to use. Scopes, right? So if you're sitting in an area and looking at a far off distance, having scopes to really enhance your experience and get that deep, close look of birds can be really fun and helpful. And other sorts of accessories. And we're going to talk about how to find those accessories and equipment with as few barriers as possible. So we've even linked in resources to rent, checking out for free equipment. So we're really excited to talk about those things with you today, including technology that's free to download on a device, a personal device, whether it be a phone or a tablet. Cameras, whether it's the camera on a phone or the camera in your house. And then other things that we'll talk about later on will be our favorite places to find birds. We want to hear about your favorite places to find birds, local birding in your neighborhood, and different tips about being out in nature. So we've sort of been summarizing that as we started, but this is a great overview to sort of hold on to as we move forward.
Yeah. And to kind of expand on that a little bit, so one, I see we do have someone from Washington State. So a lot of what we'll have at the beginning is something that no matter where you live, it doesn't have to be in Michigan, is still relevant information. Someone on one of the comments, she actually said what she wants to know what the best binoculars are. So we'll kind of talk about how to approach that here in just a second. And then also the good places to go. So what we're hoping to later with the local versus like other places to find birds, even if we do mention places in Michigan, but for those people over in Washington, Arizona, and other states, that's not to say that you can't take some of that advice based on areas that maybe are near you to start looking into that a little bit more effectively. So.
And share out, even in Northwest Washington or wherever you're from, share out those locations, because you never know when we might be visiting your neighborhood.
Yeah. Okay. So to start off right off the bat is binoculars. So I can't tell you specifically what is the absolute best for you. So something to consider is there are a couple of things when it comes to binoculars, and the main one is the magnification. And so see here, there's this lovely picture of what an 8 times magnification versus a 10 times magnification is. And even though a lot of people might say, oh, well, closer is better, that's not necessarily always true. And the reason why that's not always true is because the closer it is, the more sensitive the binoculars are to movement. And so say it's really windy, say you have shaky hands, those higher magnifications can be very frustrating. And it may seem like a really great idea, but I mean, I think of my husband, and playing Tetris for him is just not a winner ever. And so for him, an 8 times magnification is much better versus I have steady hands. And so I do enjoy a 10 versus 12 times magnification. Something else to consider is not only what's best for you, but also where you're going to be birding. So say you live on a big lake or a big water body. Maybe you live on the ocean, but if you're in Washington State, maybe you live right on the ocean and you want to look at birds out on the ocean. In which case, if you have steady hands, a 12 times magnification binoculars will probably be really amazing. And it's because the closer magnification enables you to see further out. And it's usually better for situations like that. But the other thing to keep in mind is the closer it is, the darker those images tend to get. And so if you're in a dark area a lot, like a forested area, where things tend to be a little bit closer, the 8 times might be perfect because it's brighter versus the 12 is darker. And so it may get really hard to see those birds. Versus again, when you're on water, that 12 times magnification, because it's darker, might make it so it doesn't get whitewashed nearly as much for the birds you're looking at. And so those are some simple things just to kind of take into consideration as you're debating what type of magnification you would want for your binoculars. So
Brittany, can I add one more thing in there?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to say to people is that if you actually look at this picture right here of the two birds, or of the single bird and the different magnification, a great example of the difference is also that when you have 10 times magnification, you're looking very specifically at a single area, right? So when birds are fluttering around or moving on a branch, with the 10 time magnification, you really have to be able to track that movement. Whereas with the 8 time navigation, you have a little bit more of a zoomed out perspective. So a little bit more of that predictability to help guide you as the bird's moving around.
Absolutely. Wonderful, thanks. So yeah, and you have here at the bottom, so if you're more of a beginner birder, what we're kind of recommending is if you are just have a hankering and you don't want to test out other binoculars, you just want to dive in 100%, try an 8x42 magnification. That's kind of what I would recommend as a more of a beginner starting out. They have some pretty good priced ones, which we'll also talk about here in a second. But again, I don't want to tell you what you should and shouldn't buy because each person might prefer different things. So all right, so from here, we're kind of jumping into, I said that first number is the 8x42 is recommended, but so the magnification was that first number. The next number is called the objective diameter. And so basically what you can look at this image and kind of get an idea of what that means. So a 25, just basically, it means the increased size of the angle, so a larger area. So basically when you have an 8x25, you see that image where it doesn't get nearly as wide. And so by jumping up to an 8x42, you actually have a much larger area. So I know here at Detroit Audubon, we have a lot of binoculars that are an 8x35. They're not the best when it comes to objective diameter, but they still do the job. It's still an opportunity for people to get a feel for them. But again, the bigger the objective diameter, the larger area you're able to see. So, but yeah, and then again, unfortunately, something to consider is that the larger the magnification, the larger the objective diameter, the heavier the binoculars are going to get. And so that's something else to consider. And we'll talk about something that might help alleviate that weight if you are going to go for bigger binoculars later. That will help make it a little bit easier on your back and your neck. So from here, we have price range. So there are so many prices of binoculars all throughout the sun, honestly. There are really cheaper ones, there's more expensive ones. It's again, whatever your comfort level and your price range / budget is. But again, what I would recommend before anything else is before you buy anything, rent or borrow. So even if you're not here located in Michigan, maybe you're located in a state where there is a nearby Audubon organization or a nature center or some kind of location where they might have rentable binoculars, or if you attend one of their field trips, they might have binoculars for you to borrow. And that gives you an idea of, do you like the lower magnification, the higher, what works best for you? And that would be what I recommend first and foremost before you go out and buy anything. Like it's listed on the slide, get your feet wet, because your friend may like something that's completely different from what you like. And so you have two pictures here where there's some kids binoculars. So obviously if you have some kids, you know, they're going to get bigger, but you don't want them to ruin a really expensive pair of binoculars. Maybe you get a slightly cheaper set that still enables them to be able to enjoy going out with you. But still getting that experience of getting to look at things through a magnification. But then here's another perfect example of another great set of binoculars, and that's the 8x48 binoculars that you can actually get from the Belle Isle Nature Center. And as you can see, the price is pretty reasonable compared to some binoculars. $150. I mean, it's not the cheapest pair, but honestly, what I would recommend is 100 to 150 is a really good priced range to get some really nice sets of binoculars without breaking the bank. Again, that's not to say if you have the capability and you want to splurge and get something a little bit nicer, you can kind of see here, we have a couple different ranges. So you have your good value. It's honestly recommended because if you're just getting started, you don't want to spend a ton of money if you're not sure you absolutely love going out birding. But that's not to say that they aren't just as good as some expensive ones. If you want to look into some lower mid-range, that 150 to 300, and then you have your upper end, which is 300 to 1,000 or up. And so again, it's just kind of finding what works best for you.
Yeah, and I just want to echo the free aspect, right? So the two pictures that you see on the screen now are both available at the Belle Isle Nature Center for you to check out, to take a stroll on a lovely boardwalk area behind the Nature Center, to do birding, or for a stroll to the lighthouse of Belle Isle Park. And so nothing's better than free, right? We definitely always recommend that. And I also want to echo what Jen wrote in the chat, which is that their local library in Ferndale, Michigan has a library of things with binoculars to borrow for Oakland County residents. So checking into your local institutions like your libraries and other institutions near you is a great way to find out about all of the tools that are available for you for free.
Absolutely. Actually, during our last presentation in June, during the research, I had started looking into organizations for us to list as well that were local. And there's even some places that if you have your local library and you call and ask if they have something like that on hand for you to borrow, if they don't, they might be interested in getting it. And so sometimes all it takes is just someone asking and they're open to getting it. And so it never hurts to ask.
Mhm.
So moving into scopes. So I mentioned the magnification when it came to binoculars. And so think of that 12 times magnification for the binoculars. Obviously, again, you don't want to have something with 20 to 60 time magnification going around your neck. Ouch. So what they do is they put that into a scope, and sometimes it's used in other types of activities, but for us, scopes are perfect for distance birding. And so I say that mostly thinking of those larger bodies of water. So for instance, we do winter waterfowl counts, and scopes for us are crucial because if you're looking across just even a wide river, scopes are actually pretty important to be able to see pretty far. And so, or maybe even if there's a bird that's not that far and you just want to get a better look at it, scopes are great. What I would recommend is getting a scope that has an adjustable range. What I would say is that 20 by 60 magnification. And then that way you can adjust that, focus on something, spin it until you can see it. And that way, if it's maybe it's a little closer, a little further away, you have some adjustability. And you can take that in further in a variety of areas and still be able to see things. Again, they're not light. It may not seem heavy initially, but if you're carrying it around for a long period of time, you'll want to consider that. Maybe get a back strap, something to help. But yeah, they do eventually, after multiple hours of being outside, carrying things that even if they're only 10 pounds, do eventually start to get heavy. Um, and I say that as a young individual, it happens. It doesn't matter your age. If you hold something, no matter its weight long enough, it starts to get heavy. Um, Here you see there are other types as well. There are fixed eyepiece ranges and zoom. I had recommended the zoom, but that's not to say if maybe you want to get a fixed eyepiece, it is up to you. Typically they're set at one set range, but again, I would recommend the zoom. And then at the very bottom, you'll see some price ranges. So again, it really just depends on what your availability is, your price ranges, your budget. Um, Sometimes if you go on a field trip, they might have one for you to look through that. Quite often, if you go on one of our field trips and it's in an area where we think a scope is necessary, we will gather around it, we'll take turns, the leader will focus it on the bird that we're trying to look at, and then everyone just take turns looking at it. And sometimes that's enough. There, if you are happy with that, there's no reason to spend the money on a scope. Again, free is awesome. We like free. That's why we get those things for you to make it easier on you so you can still enjoy it without breaking the pocketbook. But I would recommend if you're going to get one, maybe go for the cheaper range, about 250 or under. It's a plenty good scope. You don't need to break the bank to get a good scope. But again, if you have the money, get whatever you're comfortable with.
Brittany, real quick,
Yeah.
are scopes something that you recommend people are holding or that they use something to put them on? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So with scopes, yes, I absolutely recommend putting them on a tripod. Kind of going back to the binoculars, how I said the larger magnification, the more easily they're affected by wind and unsteady hands. And so go from 12 times magnification to 20 to 60, and it just significantly is more unsteady. And so you do want a tripod. You want to have something that it is sitting on, because if you're holding that with your hand, I don't think my hands are steady enough to make that work, let alone anybody else. So yeah, not only the weight is why you want a stand, but also just for that steadiness to be able to look. And then that way, if you have friends that are interested in seeing those birds, you can set it up, zoom it in, step back, and let other people enjoy. Moving forward, we have photography. So for a lot of people, this is actually how it starts for people getting into this field. They see someone with a camera, they get camera envy, or maybe they just love seeing the pictures that people they know are taking. And they're just like, oh, I wish I could do that. Those are beautiful. I want to go enjoy that. Um, Honestly, going back to, some people don't realize there are a lot of camera places that you can rent cameras from. And here you actually have a list of them in the Southeast Michigan area. I live in Livonia, and there's one really close to my house, ProCam Photo and Video Gear. They rent those out as well. So, but maybe if you live over in Madison Heights, Farmington Hills, Wixom, or Southfield, all of them have a place that you can rent cameras. Get a feel for what you like. If you are interested in buying a camera of your own, you can rent them and see what works for you. And then from there, if maybe you realize that you just enjoy doing it periodically and it's just not something that's in the budget or that you want to spend money on, just rent them periodically. And you don't have to buy on your own. But if after you rent a couple times you find this one that you just love, that's where we're going to go into bring your own camera that you've now purchased. So here is just some ideas of ones that I personally would recommend. So maybe you aren't for sure you want to get one of those big camera lenses that are 10 pounds a piece. I've held one of those. They're so heavy. Trying to hold it without a stand is difficult. Your arms get shaky. It's a workout in itself, honestly. Um, but I used to own this camera a long time ago. Sorry. Um, a long time ago, a Nikon Coolpix. I recommend them. The lenses are not removable. They're set in it, but the zoom is it has a vast range in zoom. And so you may not be able to get the ones that would necessarily be those big, heavy 10-pound lenses, but that's not to say you can't get some really nice shots if the birds are close enough. And so I would recommend some of these lower ones, those Nikon Coolpix, the Sony Cybershot. All of these kind of are like that, in that they're a great range, a great starter camera that you get your feet wet, and again, doesn't really break the bank, but still is something that's easy to transport, because again, they're not heavy. Um, because trust me, having a big lens that I've borrowed from people I know that are photographers is very heavy. You have to get a special strap for them because it catches up to you after an hour. But these are great because they have so much availability. You can see here that one, like the Olympus, is 100 to 400 millimeter lenses. That's honestly amazing because the 10-pound I borrowed from someone was a 600 millimeter, and it's nice being able to have that opportunity to get pictures up close and even a little bit further away. So if you want, we can always make these available later if you need them, but this would be what I would recommend if you're interested in purchasing a camera, but maybe don't want to go for those big cameras quite yet. So
Oh, also,
from
I wanted to add, I just dropped a link in the chat for where you can find the places to rent free cameras at. So as always, free is best. And it's a great way to try things out, right?
Mhm.
I don't know how many people who I can tell you like started with a bird walk, started with binoculars, and then just jumped right into photography because they loved it and they loved being able to look deeper at those pictures and take that moment in time to look at it deeper later on.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. And thank you so much for talking about like binoculars, scopes, cameras. Those are all different ways of really deepening a connection with birds as we observe them with our eyes. Another great way to deepen your connection with birds, learn a little bit more about the species that are around you, are our phones. Our phones have just so many capabilities now that we had to share the aspect of phones being a brilliant resource for birding, right? So of course, you've got things like maps to help you get to those birding places, ways to take photos, take videos of birds so that you can reflect on them later. But also you've got things like bird ID apps, information about birds, databases, and even fun things with your phone that you can do where you hold them up to the binoculars and you take a picture, right? So maybe you don't have that fancy camera with that big zoom quite yet, but sometimes I still just put my camera lens up to the binoculars to try to get a nice shot, which they call digiscoping. So fun term for the day. Other things that your phone can help you do as you continue birding are the Global Bird Collision Mapper. So that's a resource to learn a lot about cities and the way birds travel through cities, right? So many cities like Detroit, Chicago, and Miami are along bird migration pathways. So learning a little bit about how human structures and the built world around us has a impact with the natural world around us can help you, can be a pathway into learning about solutions, right? Such as bird safe glass, bird safe architecture, greenways that also help birding. So again, these are just fun tips as you explore birding, but we had to share all the resources that are on phones, including things like trail apps and weather apps so that you're prepared. You can get a little bit more information about what are the conditions on that trail I want to check out this weekend? What have other people reviewed about this trail? Maybe people are dropping those notes about that bird spot, that magic bird spot on the trail. So getting information from people, or maybe it's just simply using a weather app and and we're dead set on Saturday morning for birding, but looks like weather might be doing something else. So, this the world is in our pockets now if you do have a phone. So
Yeah.
many resources to use there.
And something to kind of expand on the weather is what we love whenever people go out in nature, but weather app is just amazing because yeah, it may keep you dry if it's going to rain, but also maybe it gets significantly hotter in the afternoon, or maybe it gets a lot colder. And so you know to pack maybe some extra layers or a couple extra water bottles. And so basically using the weather app to ensure your own safety and like your happiness as you're out and about. So that way you can enjoy nature a little bit more confidently.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a deeper dive into the aspect of bird identification apps, which I would say over the past couple of years have done a very valuable, have been a valuable tool for people to learn just these deeper bits of information about birds, right? You've got things like Merlin and iNaturalist and eBird, all different apps you could download for free on your phone or your digital device and help you on your identification journey as you're building these relationships with the birds around you. I love using these apps, right? So when I am also a beginner birder myself, and love all things birds, and having technology help me in this journey, having a tool in my pocket to help me ID that bird, like, oh, I like birds. What is that, right? So Merlin has the photo ID, the sound ID, which is great. You just open the app and you click Get Sound ID, and it starts recording the sounds right into your phone. And if you see on the screen, you can see the sound waves on the screen of the phone to the left. That's exactly what you see. So you're seeing this data, this audio data turned visual that's coming from the bird that technology is identifying for you. And it's just such an exciting way to learn a little bit more about birds. So I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting outside and just push play, and then boop, a bird species comes up. It'll say maybe blue jay, and then boop, cardinal comes up under that, and then boop, sparrow, and then just keeps adding and adding. So just such a fun, interesting tool.
Something I want
And
to kind of just tag before you go
yeah,
in, sorry, Ren. So something I've told people on field trips that I lead all the time is everybody kind of has these different experiences. They're what they learn best. And so I know for me, I've never been a very good audio learner. And even though something I really want to stress to everybody is say you go on a field trip with a professional, maybe it's a beginner birder class, whatever it may be. One thing to always remember is never compare your learning abilities compared to somebody else because you don't know how long they've been doing it. Maybe they learn in different ways. And something I always want to just remind people is learn at your own rate. And it's okay if you don't know something or you don't learn something well. I still use Merlin Bird ID for the sound app. I've tried for years to learn the audio IDs. It doesn't click for me, and that's okay. It is absolutely okay to say, yeah, I use an app to ID things. Um, it's all about learning, working together, and enjoying yourself outside. And so always remember as you're learning about these apps that there's nothing wrong with using apps to help you learn something as long as you're enjoying yourself. And so just always remember that and put that in your back pocket.
yeah. And Brittany, I have to share that fun moment from the first part of this webinar back in June, which was hosted by Brittany and the Nature Center's director at the Belle Isle Nature Center, Amy Green, who were chatting about bird sounds, right? And trying to identify birds based on the sounds. And Amy said, oh, this bird sounds like a car alarm. And then Brittany, you said this bird sounds like, what was it?
Laser guns.
Like a laser, pew pew. And then someone in the webinar was like, yeah, I have this bird that goes burrito, burrito, burrito. And the hilarious part is everyone's hearing a different sound or connecting it to a sound to them.
Mhm.
And all three are talking about the same bird. What was it? Cardinal?
Cardinal.
Yeah, that's hilarious, right? So not only do we have our connections to sounds and our senses and the birds around us, but now we also have technology that can take it like that deeper step, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So briefly, because I know we're just having a great time and talking about things, but briefly, I just also wanted to share, there's really fun apps like iNaturalist, where if you get a great picture of a bird, or or an audio recording of a bird, you can log that in on iNaturalist to as an identified species and go about your way, and then log in another recording, either visual or audio, and have that species. And so basically you take iNaturalist with you and it can help you like have a checklist of all these species that you've observed along the way. And then briefly, there's iNaturalist also has a app for children called Seek, and the reason that this is framed for children is because there's no location mapping or location keeping in any of the data that's connected. So for the children, it's all about the information that comes in except for the locations. So definitely a great opportunity for the young birders in your life, which I know there are many. Yeah. eBird is another great app, but I think it is best for us to share these with you now and then move on, right?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. So another great way uh, that's not so techno is birding identification through different forms of field guides, whether it's like a fold out field guide or a small book that you keep with you. I know plenty of people who like to carry around certain books with them and have little tabs on all the pages that help them identify birds. And so in the chat, we've gathered quite a few of these bird resources, and I'm going to drop them in here real quick. It's a big one, lots of different links. And so these are just other great resources for, say, for example, like me, phone's dead, can't use the technology aspect, maybe having a little trifold on your hike or in your house. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
All right, and then miscellaneous other equipment and things that can help you on your bird walk journey or your bird watching journey are really connected to where you're going and what you're doing, right? So is it a place where you think bug spray and sunscreen might be handy? Are you going into a deep woodland or by a source of water in a warm day? Today, not so much about the bug spray, because for example, for the sake that this is recorded into eternity, it's like 55 degrees out. So no need for bug spray, but sunscreen, if it works for you. Here in the pictures, we've got shoulder harnesses for binoculars, a small backpack or a fanny pack for just your little gear and your things that you're carrying around with you. Water bottle, if you're the type of person that likes to have a little water with you on your journey to stay hydrated, that's great. And other things, right? Like we mentioned scopes and camera stands to be other helpful tools for that equipment, or gaiters to wrap around the bottom of your pants, around your calf, knees, and ankle protection. And walking sticks to help you balance along the way as you're going down some of these different trails. So this is just a list of some ideas. Brittany, could you speak to the gaiters a little bit?
I was actually about to. Thank
Great.
you. So, yeah, so whenever we say gaiters, there's actually a few different types. So, there's gaiters that you actually put them over your shoes, over your ankles, and it helps if it gets really wet or muddy. But then there's these gaiters you have in a picture here. They're structured a little bit differently. And I know it's a word that everyone's going to freak out about, but promise you it's okay. They're to prevent ticks. And
Yeah.
what happens with them is those little indentations, the ticks get stuck in them. And so if you're ever worried about it, this is a great way to kind of calm your nerves a little bit and make you feel a little bit better. And again, there's all different types out throughout the sun. You can get them online, you can get them at REI or your local outdoor store, but all in all, it really just depends on what type of gator you're interested in getting.
And to jump off of Brittany's comment about ticks, you know, um, while it can be sort of like that scary topic or that like sort of like back up from nature for a moment, it's important to remember that ticks have been living in nature for a long time. They are part of the ecosystem, right? So understanding that when you're going on a hike, when you're done with that hike, doing the tick check, right? Checking
Always.
your pants, your ankles, your wrists, just going through and doing a sweep when you're done with a hike is such an important way to leave there knowing you've done your due diligence to make sure you're not taking anything out of the forest with you. But things like poison ivy and ticks, we have to remember are parts of the ecosystem, right? They are food sources for animals. Poison ivy is habitat for animals. So while they can be scary to talk about, it's very important that we talk about the fact that they are part of nature. They are part of the ecosystems all around us, but that can we can go into those situations and leave those situations knowing I'm doing my due diligence to check my body, check areas to make sure I don't have any ticks on me, knowing what poison ivy looks like to make sure that we're aware of what we're looking for, what to avoid. Things like that are just such an important part of sort of demystifying or taking away a little bit of the stigma around things like ticks and poison ivy.
Yeah,
So since we brought those up, I'll definitely add some pictures into the chat later on.
sounds good. Thank you. So now we're going to be talking about someone said where to go birding, things like that. So we're going to start before you even go out to places, bringing birds to you. So if say it is largely dependent on say you have a property or you live somewhere where maybe you can have a community garden. It's all about what you plant. So bird feeders are great, they're wonderful, um, but I'm sure across the globe people have been hearing about bird flu. And it's a problem. And what I've been telling people when they ask, well, can I put my bird feeders up? Is it safe? Is it okay yet? What I tell them is one, check in with your local Wild Birds Unlimited. They keep up with that. However, what I recommend is plant native plants. Right now is still a perfect time to go out and buy some plants that are maybe for sale at a nursery. Plant those in your yard before it gets too cold. And they have all winter to establish. And then next spring, you just get to warm a little bit more and you get to enjoy them. And as they fill in, like this picture up in the top right, uh, they'll start attracting those birds. And whether you can put your bird feeders out or not, you one get to enjoy these beautiful plants that one help manage water because they have such deep root systems that they manage. If say you have a little bit of flooding in your property, they'll help control that. Um, they take almost no watering after the first year because their root systems get so deep into the local water underground that they don't need you to water them. And so low maintenance. We love our lazy gardeners. But it's great because it's a natural food source for the birds. And the bird feeders are great for the adult birds, but when it comes to the chicks, the adults feed them almost entirely caterpillars. And you can't really get those really healthy, juicy caterpillars from a bird feeder, or if you can, it's a lot of money. But you can from your native wildflower gardens. And by having those native plants to attract those caterpillars, the birds will love the food source in the insects that are eating them, the seeds in the fall, and it also provides habitat and resources for other creatures as well. So we love our native plants. Not only your flowers, but your trees and shrubs. One thing to keep in mind is one single oak tree can feed hundreds of caterpillar species. Hundreds, one tree. And so it's just, and you get to enjoy the shade and all the other benefits of a tree. But again, the bird feeders are a great option. Something else to consider is not only do things need to eat, everything needs water. And so having bird baths are also crucial. So, or maybe you have a little pond or something like that. If you have a bird bath, they do make heated bird baths or things that are heated that you can put in your bird bath to keep the water fresh and available all winter long as well. And so something you want to consider. But something also I want to kind of bring up is thinking about what these birds eat. So something that we'll probably touch on in part 3 of our webinar is we'll start talking into the bird species, maybe what types of birds are attracted by what. So certain birds they've found are attracted, you can look at what they eat based on the structure of their beak. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But that is something to consider. And so I have a perfect example is you could put out a bird feeder, and even if you are used to seeing robins, you almost never see them on a bird feeder. And it's because they don't eat that type of food. And so that is something to consider as you are looking to attract your birds. From there, we move into the local birding. So again, maybe you don't have the space to start planting flowers or putting out bird feeders. Maybe you have a local park near you. But before you even get into the park, just kind of stop and sit. Maybe it's your backyard, um, maybe it's near work or wherever you happen to be that you find you want to just sit for a while. What I recommend is just stop and listen. Because honestly, when it comes to birds, usually you see them before or you hear them before you see them. And so just kind of listen and enjoy the bird sounds. And when you hear them, start looking for where the sound is. And then you get to start enjoying them visually and in an audio capacity. And so that's the first thing that I would recommend is just start listening to the birds. And from there, maybe you'll find where they are near you. So again, your house is a perfect place. It's an area that you can control, that you can plant and put up whatever you want. Um, from there, you have your neighborhoods. So Ryan mentioned maybe you have a neighbor that has a bigger property or that already has an established garden and you see them outside all the time. Maybe you say, hey, maybe they have binoculars they'd be okay to let you borrow, or maybe you get binoculars you can share together and you can enjoy all the birds in your neighborhood that are coming and going throughout the year. From there, maybe it's a local park that, who knows, maybe there's a gardening club and you can encourage the gardening club to plant a native prairie at a local park or native trees or shrubs. And then over time, you get to enjoy those birds coming in and out of those areas that you have right in your backyard or near your house. From there, it gets into the more common areas people automatically assume that you'd go to look for birds, and that's your woods, your refuges, nature preserves, maybe open water bodies, things like that. But above all else, I just want to always remind people because when you're out walking out in the woods, people often forget to look up. And birds have wings, they fly, and we sometimes forget that if you wanna see the birds, always remember to look up, not only on the ground to me, but don't forget to look at the ground so you don't stumble and trip, but looking up is a great way to find the birds. So
Yeah, great. Thank you. And also, I was just thinking about when you were like, maybe my neighbor has a big property or a cool garden. Like, yeah, let them do the work. We can be the lazy gardener. They're bringing the birds to us, right? Great. So we wanted to chat a little bit about Southeast Michigan's birding hotspots, right? So here in the picture, you've got the Belle Isle Nature Center. If you saw this on the news, you found out that the Belle Isle Nature Center of the Detroit Zoological Society just reopened after a 2.5 year closure. We've gone through renovations inside and outside. And one of those areas is a bird observation window. It's this beautiful bay window, floor to ceiling windows, and it overlooks a small built stream. It overlooks some native plants and then the woods behind the Belle Isle Nature Center. So even if you're doing your birding inside, come visit us down on Belle Isle at the Nature Center and take a look at this awesome bird viewing window area. We've put in there some binoculars, some children's books to ignite the spark in those young birders, and then along with the nature center itself, Belle Isle in general, right? Part of this migration pathway along the eastern end of Lake Huron, Lake St. Clair, and down into Lake Erie hosts multiple birds flying over. And so this, migration is such a huge regional thing. And Belle Isle is just one small part of that long migration. So we hope to see you at the Nature Center to observe some of the fall migration that's happening now. Other areas further down towards Lake Erie along some of these migration routes is, I do not know how to pronounce this, but Point Moulet?
Point Moulet.
Moulet, yep, state game area. The Huron-Clinton Metro Parks, right? I remember being a young kid, bird watching in Kensington Park, my first time, to other areas like Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair Metro Park, and check the Metro Park websites too, right? Like they've got a lot of great programming and special events all about birds as well. We could go on and on, but the Detroit Riverfront. Oh, this is a cool one. So cemeteries. I love cemeteries, right? Because you've got this huge area that is preserving all of these mature trees. They've been here these cemeteries have been here for a while, right? You see these old tombstones, which means those trees have been here for a while. And some cemeteries, like Elmwood Cemetery in Detroit, are arboretums. They're certified arboretums. So you've got these mature trees, which birds love. As Brittany was saying earlier, these oak trees host so many different species because they're hosting the insects, which the birds feed on. So it's habitat, it's homes, it's food sources. All of those things come together. And so I know our time is getting brief, so I'll quit being so excited. And yeah, what slide are we on? Should we keep moving? I'm all jazzed up. We talked about cemeteries.
Well, we're winding down now.
We are. Great. So is this your slide? I don't know. I'm off. I've forgotten everything.
No, you're all
great.
set.
It's me. All right, great. So birding is this awesome thing that everyone's getting into, right? And when out in nature, we want to be thoughtful of how much space we're taking up in nature, right? All of us as individuals. So the space we take up in regards to wildlife, right? I always tell people, keep your distance from wildlife. It's something that is so important for the wildlife all around us, and it's a symbol of respect, right? That it's not often in wildlife when large animals get right next to each other when they're not the same species, right? And so giving respect, giving that space between coyotes and deer is a great way to observe them from afar and notice their habits, notice what they're up to, notice how the deer, the coyote, the birds all behave in nature.
Something else to consider when it comes to the respecting wildlife is it's great if you're feeding it out in your yard, but whenever you go to a nature area, it may seem like a great idea to feed these wild animals. And unless the local area tells you it's okay and what it is okay to feed them, it's better to not. So for instance, bread is not good. It actually hurts the birds that you end up feeding it. So if you ever see someone feeding birds bread, tell them to stop. It's not okay. It's not okay for them. It's not healthy. But also in the same opposite side of the spectrum, it may seem like it's great because you get that really close interaction with the birds or wildlife, but you're getting them to be socially used to people. And a lot of times those animals get food aggressive. And so by feeding them regularly, you're also teaching them to get closer to people, and there's higher chances of people getting negative interactions with animals that might deter them from enjoying nature the same way that we would. And so not only in respecting wildlife, but also just knowing that they have food in those wild areas, let them be, don't feed them if you can avoid it. Again, unless it's an area that is maybe a designated place like Kensington Metro Park, you can bring food in your hand for the seeds, but there's certain birds that you do still want to avoid feeding, like turkeys. Do not ever feed the turkeys. Don't feed the swans. Swans, those bigger birds, don't ever hand feed. They get food aggressive, and because they're big, they cause a lot more harm. So that's something to keep in mind is even if you're in a designated area, you do want to avoid feeding those bigger animals.
Thank you. Another thing to talk about is respecting the other people around us, right? Because everyone's coming into birding or hiking or the outdoors from a different place, right? And so making sure that us as individuals are not taking up too much space in a natural or an outdoor place is really important, because the outdoors is for everyone, and not everyone has the same access to the outdoors. Not everyone feels welcome in outdoors like some people do. So it's very important for you, for all of us, to try to to do a better job at acknowledging how much space am I taking up right now in the outdoors. How much am I doing welcoming new learners, new birders, or people in general, period, into the outdoors, you know? So I just had to say that part too. I think it's very important that we all go into the outdoors with a level of humility and respect for the other people who want to enjoy it as well. Um, I also want to be thoughtful of our time. With so few minutes left, I would love to hear about if anyone has questions, right? Is that okay, Brittany? Do we have
Yeah,
time?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions they have for us about some of the things we've talked about? We covered most of the questions that came up, and we put a lot of fun links in here to give you an opportunity to further your learning about birding.
Yeah. So let's see.
I see Cheryl has a question. What about at my house? My mom feeds squirrels peanuts and we get turkeys by the house. They eat scraps by the bird feeder. This is at my house. Okay, so here's the thing, Cheryl. Nobody's about to tell you what to do at your house. It's your house. You do you, right? Of course, there's all these ideas about tips and safety that we can provide for you. You know your home. You and your family have your routines that are important to you all. So it's important that your lived experiences are shared with your family and the people who are important to you.
Yeah. So let's see. Go for it.
Cheryl's asking that she recently learned hummingbirds are migratory birds, right? They go to Honduras like many birds. They travel down to Honduras for the winter. How do they know where to go and how to get there? You know, this is still something that even scientists are figuring out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When we think about birds, are they following each other? Are they learning from the other birds of their species and traveling together? Or is it internal, right? Is there something built into their senses that can help them track what's going on? Another thing to think about is like, gosh, the world is just so big and beautiful. Like the animals spend all this time outside. They get a good idea of the rhythms of the world. And so whether they're traveling with others of their same species, or there is something inside, whether it's their head or in their heart, and it's pulling them to a certain location. It's a magical thing that scientists are still learning all about, but it's a great question too. And it's a great reason to talk about late blooming nectar sources like New England aster, which is blooming right now. Those late,
Goldenrod.
yeah, goldenrod, those late blooming nectar sources are fuel for migratory birds on their way back to their winter habitat. So just another fun tip there.
Yeah, to expand a little bit on what Ryan is saying is some of the methods that they've found, and they can't say for sure if it's one set method per bird or if it's a mixture of all different things. Those are all things that we're constantly learning, but some examples of how what birds do use to navigate during migration is whenever land areas are, so like lakes, mountains, things like that, they do use those. If they're songbirds, they're usually nighttime migrators. And so with that, they use the stars, um,
Yeah, so cool.
the sun and stars, magnet. There's kind of like an internal magnet in some birds' brains, and they can use that to find which direction to go. I mean, it's fascinating, but something to keep in mind. I talk about nighttime bird migrants, and for them, how dark it is, there is such a thing called light pollution. And so for some of you that are actually in the Southeast Michigan area, or people out in other states, you can look into what places nearby have dark sky parks or astronomy types of education, and they'll teach you about why it needs to be as dark as possible during migration time. So turn off your lights. It's a huge thing you can do, because at night in their migrating, they see, it almost looks like to them like the sun is coming up if a city is really bright. And so by turning off your lights, you're reducing that light pollution, and you're making it easier for birds to know exactly what direction to go, and they're less likely to fly into big cities, get lost, confused, and unfortunately end up running into windows. And so turning off your lights are some of the best things you can do in migration. But any
Yeah.
other questions?
Plants. I see, who was this? Eduardo mentioned a thanks about the tip about not feeding bread to birds, and shared his experiences with his family, right? That's why it's so important that, we can recommend things that are appropriate from our perspective, but the things that families do on their own can be very important to families, right? And so this learning that happens in moments like this, or whatever it may be, it's just really important. And it just shows the dynamic ways that we all bird in different ways, and that all of them have value for ourselves and for our families and the people that we share it with.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
if no one has any other questions, thank you so much for coming, everybody. Birdcast. Oh yeah, there we go. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
So in the comments, there is a link for you to be able to see where the birds are flying in your area. Birdcast.info. And so that's a great resource to be able to see where they're going. And so yeah, there's always a way. That's what's so great about your phones, your computers, and technology, is it is making it easier for people to enjoy something that is literally at the tips of our fingertips, and that's for birding. So, oh, Nicaragua, wow. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Thank you, Eduardo.
But awesome. Thanks for coming, everybody. If you want to attend future webinars, I know here at Detroit Audubon, we offer them monthly, once a month. Both organizations offer various webinars. We have presentations on our websites. We offer pretty regular field trips, whether it's on Belle Isle or other areas. And we always like seeing people out birding with us. So.
Yes, thank you all very much for attending. Come and see me at the Belle Isle Nature Center. Come and see Brittany on these really cool bird walks with the Detroit Audubon. And we're just so appreciative of your time, and all the best to you on your birding journey.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
All right, bye.
Bye. Thank you. I'll see you guys soon.
Yep.